Rock and roll.
We're on. Call meeting to order for the three-member interpretation panel hearing for October 19th. For Building Board, Board of Building Regulations, Examiners and Appeals. Meeting's called to order. We can take roll, please.
John Steele,
Here.
Royal Field,
Here.
Scott Loney,
Here.
and for staff, Ross Nossinger,
Here.
Hans Gisler,
Here.
and Clark Rosenkrantz.
Here.
Okay, everyone's present.
You can introduce yourselves, please, for the record.
Oh, I'm Gretchen Steller. Sandra Obid.
Shelby Stanley.
Slavic one.
Thank you. We've got an agenda before us. Any changes to the agenda?
I move to approve the agenda as published.
Second. We don't have any comments, so we've got an agenda ahead. We'll be hearing case number BCI-04-2017, interpretation of a progressive fine that has been filed on behalf of San Ribero Project LLC. Is that correct?
I would like, I guess the interpretation would be is that it's fined to a separate company. They find 3 different companies.
Right, but you filed it as Senator.
Correct.
As
Okay.
it says BCA. Is it, just for correction here, is it BCI per the agenda or BCA per the paperwork?
It's I.
It's I.
It is.
Okay.
A is for administrative, and I didn't see the I.
Got it, just so we get that nice and tight. We can swear everybody in, please. We raise hands in the proper way. Okay, raise your right hand. All who will be testifying, including. Do you affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in the matter before us is the truth?
I do.
I do.
I'm just here as a private citizen.
Oh, you're not.
Yeah. No, I'm not.
I thought you
staff.
were presenting. I'm sorry.
No.
I do.
I do. I do.
Done. Okay, as I understand it, staff will present the case. The appellant will have an opportunity to present their position, and then the staff presents. Do I have those two backwards?
Staff presents, he introduces and tells you his case. We then get our say, and then he concludes.
Okay. See,
Good.
that's as I understood it, as I was gonna get to it, but fine word. Okay, if you can make your introductions, please.
Clark Rosenkrantz, code enforcement officer, basically is going to provide the background to, I guess, to the case.
So I was out on a service request and happened to see the property with a lot of activity happening. A lot of dumpsters, trucks filled full of interior finished materials. There was one with a boiler in it. So it sparked my interest, stopped. Saw Twins Home Improvement there, their van was parked. And then I proceeded to the other van, it was unmarked, because I wanted to know who they were, because I'm checking licensing, permitting. And I walked up to 2 individuals that was noted in here. One, I didn't know the other one, but the first one was, his name is Sam Busher. And I had previously written him up on a project, and asked who he was working for, because he knows who I am. And he said that he was working for one, and I didn't run it past that. I made my way through the building and took my photos, and saw there was violations. First off was the carports that needed to be permitted that had alterations to it. Inside the one unit, there was a new boiler, standalone water heater. There's some electrical stuff. Romex is pretty new. Romex is pretty apparent. It's yellow. I walk into a house or complex is built in the 70s, yellow wires, pretty flashy. And then from there, I just made my phone calls, and I started researching the property. And, you know, the owner was San Roberto LLC. So I'm like, okay, so I get on the state website, figure out who San Roberto LLC is, and then it had another, you know, registered agent was Shelby Stanley. So then I look up, you know, and it said 100%. There's another business name right there, another LLC. So I looked that one up. I had 4 owners, Shelby Stanley, Mr. Lund, Victor Powell, Bernard Powell. So if you look that up, you know, Shelby Stanley and Slavic Lund are both owners of Lund Construction. Bernard Powell was a previous owner of Twins Home Improvement, and then Victor Powell is the current owner of Twins Home Improvement. To me, when I was on site, it made sense. You know, there was another company doing electrical, no permits. There was one demo permit on the one building, but the rest of it was. So to me, you know, Progressive Electric they got fined. They got their notice of permit requirement, their notice violation. Twins did, and so did Lund. And it's just kind of trickled down from there about how, you know, why we implemented on the owners. So,
What you just described happened at San Roberto Drive, then?
yes.
So then you basically.
So it's two fiveplexes.
Two fiveplexes, two different buildings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's the 2 fiveplexes. Each one a separate address, tax IDs.
So each one would be a permit.
Right.
And so, Twins Home Improvement, Lund's Construction all had previous notices of permit requirement. And as a result, their fines were assessed in accordance with the fee table. Progressive fines, which is spelled out in here.
23, yeah.
And it's our understanding, and this is probably the point that needs to be cleared, is what the appellant is appealing tonight is our ability to assign progressive fines because they had a corporation, San Roberto LLC, that was created specifically to do this one project.
Specifically just for a flip. This is what they do.
And so San Roberto LLC does not have any previous violations. However, the agent of San Roberto LLC, through his contracting business, does have prior notices of permit requirement. And hence, that's why we assessed progressive fines.
And that's Shelby Stanley?
Correct. Other individuals were assessed progressive fines. Shelby is the only one who appealed.
Others being home, please?
Who was all assessed progressive fines on this job?
Both Twins Home Improvement and Progressive Electric. So Progressive Electric was just a subcontractor to these guys. And they were installing some surface mount electrical for the carports and outside. There was some underground stuff that was being placed.
So there's nobody here representing Twins Home Construction tonight?
Oh, there's no one here for
They
Twins.
did not appeal. I'm,
Okay.
yeah, I'll go there.
Okay.
Mechanical,
Mechanical work?
yeah.
I don't know who did the mechanical work.
Yeah, we've never got to know.
I haven't got the answer on who's done that.
So there was a lot of finish type work being done that didn't require permits, like paint, carpeting, all that kind of stuff. But there was mechanical work done that required permits.
Electrical,
And then there's electrical work done that required permits, and then there was structural work done that required permits, being new sonotubes, new columns for the
Yeah.
carports.
Some of the firewalls, from what I've seen in one of my photos, one of the firewalls looks like between the units has been compromised. It was cut open as a doorway, I think maybe for access for construction, but
So working on firewalls, that would require a permit.
And mechanical work, did that consist of the boiler or how long?
So in the one unit, it had a brand new boiler and standalone direct water heater.
Would have the work that didn't require permitting, the specific code, plumbing, mechanical, electrical, working on firewalls, would have it exceeded $5,000?
We
Then
have,
it needs a permit.
right, yeah, anytime, even if it's under 5,000, electrical
Yeah.
needs a permit and mechanical needs a permit.
And structural, even if structural is under 5,000.
Sure, those all
Right.
require
They all
permits regardless of
individually,
the
yeah.
professional roles
Right.
associated with them, but
And
if
public
it's
safety,
non,
right.
The 5,000,
type of, if it's non-registered type of work, then
Right.
it's still, if it exceeds
Right.
5,000.
yeah, the $5,000 limitation would apply to work like re-roofing, but not new siding, replacing, repairing siding, re-roofing, redoing gypsum wallboard, if that exceeds 5,000.
Does that include finishes at all? Cabinetry?
No,
That's all
so
exempt.
work that's specifically exempt, like cabinets and whatnot, evaluation doesn't matter.
Right.
We'll give you an opportunity to present your case now, unless anybody else has more questions for me this time. Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. I guess let me make sure I go through this. So I'm specifically contesting the fact that they're finding us as Lund Construction, Twins Home Improvement, and Progressive Electric separately because of the way the code is actually written. That's what I was reading it as, and so I'm trying to clarify that. The first question I had was the violation is based on not having a permit, correct? So that would be my understanding, is that the violation is because of not having a permit. And so if the violation is because we don't have a permit, I wanted to address that, and they have it on the letter that they wrote out. If you go to that, it says 23.
Which letter we're referring to, what page?
The letter, the municipality of Anchorage has written a letter of. Correct, yes, that one.
Okay.
And on the second page of that letter, if you look in the bottom, it has the actual code for the permits required. And under that, 23.10.104.1, which is my assumption, that's the code that they're referencing for the necessity. I mean, that's the violation that they are writing for us. Any owner or authorized agent intending to construct, enlarge, repair, alter. So it specifically targets owner or authorized agent intending to construct. And then it says, shall first make application to the building official and obtain the required permit unless required work is specifically exempted by this code. There's no reference to the contractor in that specific paragraph at all, or any of the contractors more specifically. So the necessity for a permit is solely on the head of the owner of the property. And owner is defined at the beginning of Title 23. So if you go to the beginning of Title 23, it says owner, anybody who has a vested interest that's recorded on the property. Do we have copies? Do you guys have a copy of Title 23?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so that's what I'm referencing, so that if we're receiving a violation for not having a permit, then they're finding the people they're finding are Lund Construction, Twins Home Improvement, and Progressive Electric. All three of those people are not the homeowner. While we do own Lund Construction, and Twins Home Improvement is owned by it's owned by Victor Powell, they're separate entities. They're not the same entity that owns the property.
Who owns the property?
Who owns, yeah, correct. Who owns the property, San Roberto Project LLC. That's owned by another entity, which is a shell entity that owns it's the intent is to own multiple properties and separate liability.
Is that BSSV Holdings?
Correct. So we created BSSV Holdings so that we could have, it's basically a management company, so that we could go out and purchase properties, put them in their own individual LLC, and that would separate liability for each and every property that we do. It's just for future, if anything fails or anything happens for future's sake, then those are completely separated from every other business we've done, and they can't go after the assets of those other things that we've done. And we do that specifically, bank accounts wise, everything is separated. So that's why I did that. And we weren't doing it to bypass the permitting process specifically. We were doing it to get our liabilities separated between multiple properties. Because we do we do more than one at a time. And if something goes wrong at one property and they decide to sue us on that one property, and they're in the same shell of like, I own all of them, then now they have the ability to go after all of those assets. And so that's why we separate the liability. Under this sense, also going back to the code, if the owner is the one that's responsible for pulling the permits, and the violation is issued to the contracting companies that they saw on site, then I think the violation was issued incorrectly, because the contractor on the municipal code is not the one that's responsible to pull the permit, the owner is.
Would you go as far as then to say that you're wanting to rectify this and name BSSV Holdings?
No, San Roberto Project LLC, because that's the one who owns the property. BSSV owns the company. San Roberto Project LLC is the owner of the property, in record and municipalities. And so what I was asking in the meeting that we had with the three gentlemen across from us, I was asking them to fine us under the name San Roberto Project LLC as not an NOPR situation, because it is a first violation for San Roberto Project LLC. It would be a first violation, and then 1 and 2, it would be 2 separate violations in that sense, because each project is a separate project under the municipal code. And so my argument would be that one, there are 2 separate projects. The owner of that project should be fined, which would be the LLC. And the byproduct is anybody who's doing work on that is just orchestrated by the individual who's the LLC. And in that sense, it's myself.
But BSSV, both of you are owners of
Correct.
BSSV, therefore you're also owners of the San Roberto project?
Inherently, because BSSV owns
Okay, and then you also own these contracting companies,
in a separate LLC.
which have been fined prior.
Correct.
So you still continue to do work without permits knowingly, is that correct?
That is correct.
Seems like a bad practice.
So if I could just ask a question relative to the same letter you referenced, you turn to page 3 of 3, and the description of 2310 105 15.4.2. And there is, I guess I'm going to the last 2 sentences in particular. One is underlined, but the one before that states, no individual or company granted a waiver under this section shall be afforded additional waivers for future offenses. So do you take exception to the fact that you as an individual have received those, that wouldn't carry over?
I'm not asking for a waiver in this instance. So
You're just wanting them to,
the $1,000 fine that they're typically waiving for the first offense, I'm not asking for that as a waiver in that instance. And that's what, to me, that says. That doesn't say that it attaches to future projects. I understand that if I had an employee that said I wanted to take responsibility, I don't have any employees, but if I had an employee that wanted to take responsibility for an action in a company that we did, something that we did, in the sake that they want to try to get a waiver for that action of an NOPR, then that would make sense in this situation. Because again, they have the discretion to say that they don't want to give a waiver. But to me, that doesn't say that they can add the progressive fine that the individual has collected over previous instances to this one instance.
well, could you speak to the last sentence then?
The last sentence would be, when the building official has reasonable cause to believe an inspection fee waiver is requested by a person to avoid payment of the fee by another person or company who was previously granted. But still, again, it addresses the waiver. It's not addressing the fee or the fine. It's just addressing the waiver itself, right?
Well,
I mean, what is the waiver in general?
I think, just to give you a summary of where I'm coming from on this, my understanding of reading the code sections is that it goes through when permits are required, and then it goes through investigation, and
Sure.
then it goes through miscellaneous fees and fines.
Mhm.
And I think it's all pretty straightforward in terms of what the code is saying. And what I'm seeing here is emphasized in what I'm asking questions relative to. We've got an instance here of an individual, yourself, who has received these prior, and you're part of an entity that's doing further work. And again, you're doing it without permit. I guess I'm trying to find out what is compelling to say you're not an individual that was previously granted a waiver. Therefore, you're not going to be granted a waiver in this instance. And you have waivers and fines if you don't have a permit. So I'm trying to find out your take on what's the big leap here of you're an individual that has received these in the past.
But under, I guess, my perspective is that the individual, I'm an individual, and I'm an individual who owns multiple LLCs. If I act in regards to, let's say I have an LLC in a different business, and I do. Let's say I act in regards into that sense. I'm Shelby Stanley acting in representation of myself as an LLC for this other business. And I get fined for that other business that I'm acting, that they think I'm acting for, when in reality I'm acting for a separate business. And so in this instance, I'm getting fined as Shelby Stanley in Slavic Lund, as Lund Construction, because of the actions that were taken at a project that we also own in a separate entity. And those two are separated, to me, legally, because they aren't owned inherently, they're only owned by me, but because they're LLCs, they are separate entities completely under the law.
So I guess I'll just jump to the chase here. Why do you continue to work without getting permits?
I think that's out of fear. I know it sounds bizarre, but it's because our industry, I mean, specifically flips, are inherently very risky. And we go in looking at what we can see when we buy these properties. So we go in and we can't tear things out, we can't demo anything until we own that property. What ends up happening is we go in and we find things that we need to take care of, we fix things, and as we're going through these things, we continue to progress and work. And in some instances, let's say I have had an instance where I come in and I ask a question to the electrical inspector about what needs to be done to remedy this project. I've had multiple instances where that remedy is very costly to the business, so much so that now we have lost money on 2 projects. So it's becoming, and that's not inherently the responsibility, that they're doing their job to bring the property to code in the way that they interpret it. It goes back onto the risk of us in general, that we're buying these properties, we're taking the risk, we're going through it. And so when we have to bring in somebody that now wants to enforce the code, the building code, to a point on, and understandably, because we're required to by law, when we bring these people in, and the interpretation of this now is so much so that example would be, I change an outlet on a building, now I must change everything inherently that feeds that outlet, including up to the breaker. When that happens, now I'm changing breakers in every unit. On a 5-plex now, that goes from, instead of changing outlets for $500, it goes to $5,000. And
So are you going to quit doing 5 plexes?
well, it's not about. I mean, yes, I would quit doing. I'm not going to intend to stay in this town anymore, because that doesn't. The business model doesn't work if that happens.
And so, one other, when you flip the property, do you put forward any kind of guarantee or warranty to the purchaser that it's code compliant?
No, because we're the homeowner. And in the same sense as the homeowner.
Well, I'm just going back on when I bought a home and had an inspection.
Sure.
You have an inspector that goes through it, and they can often identify things. then you get in the position of trying to negotiate who pays for those adjustments. So, I guess it's just trying to find out how you maybe do business at the other end of the flip relative, if cost is the issue.
Well, and that's one of the biggest issues that we have to face, because when you don't know the unexpected side of it, and you have to now go in and assume that everything is gonna get changed if you decide to change one element of it. If you leave it alone and doesn't change it, then you don't have to change it inherently, in some elements of the existing building code, not all of them. And the dangerous things you have to fix, but what happens is when we try to resell a property, let's say we left something like a degraded outlet, and so the decision to change the outlets is inherently from tan to white, and now you're changing the color. We're changing the color essentially. The function is not any different, but we've decided to do that because of a stylistic preference, because of people who buy properties or people who want to rent properties. It comes down to more of a stylistic thing, but now because we choose to do that stylistically, we're now essentially addressing everything that's attached to that. And that becomes a problem here for us, because you get these 70s built properties with push-matic breakers in it, and they just don't have the protection that the new buildings do. And I don't disagree that the protection is necessary. I don't disagree with that. I think the problem is that as a homeowner, let's say I go and buy a home, and I buy homes that aren't in that extent. And let's say I go buy a home and I do the same process as a homeowner, I'm not held to that same standard, because I also am a realtor and I do understand that process pretty well. And the typical home inspectors that go and inspect homes are significantly less qualified than the inspectors that work for the municipality, in my understanding, because they don't address a lot of what's behind the walls. They just address what they can see. And a lot of times that doesn't necessarily address the problems in an existing home.
Yeah, I can agree with what he said there, but, I mean, you've chosen a business that in flipping homes or building homes that requires that once you do a certain amount of work, you have to go by the code. I mean, so that's part of the risk factor of the business that you chose to go in here. You just used building codes as an excuse that you have to fix everything to code when you do a certain amount of work, and that's why you don't get a permit, because it would cost you too much. But that's your business. And now you're fixing this stuff and selling it to an unsuspecting person where you know that there's code violations. And I'm almost guessing that if you've been caught this many times, how many other times have you done this and not been caught? I mean, I'm having a hard time finding the justification. It's your choice to do this work. It's not, nobody's forcing you to do it. And a part of your job is to get inspections by the municipality of Anchorage, because you're within the municipality of Anchorage. Then that's just what you have to do. I mean, I don't see that there's any good reason or excuse to not get those.
Let's say that a good portion of these properties that we buy are significantly degraded, to a point so much so that they actually house a lot of our homeless. They house people that use. They are places that are essentially safe havens for them, but create a lot of problems in the community that they're in. And I have, these two existing properties are definitely examples of that, because they were very much so those two properties for that street. And so yes, inherently, because we take the risk, I understand and I agree that we must account for that thing. The problem is that when you're competitively speaking to everybody else in the market, and 10 other people bid on a property, and we have to come in and say, all right, where do we cut our expenses? Where do we cut our costs to be able to outbid these people, to be able to do this project? When you are competing with multiple other people in this industry who do it in the exact same way in terms of, you know, in violation and leaving people with, I wouldn't call it up to code because there's no way you could ever bring these properties up to current code. There's so many elements of them that are out of current code that would not make them ever feasible to current existing building code. Now, or to current IRC or IBC. Existing building code is totally different because it really spells out exactly what you have to do for those specific things. And I wouldn't say what we're doing is not bringing them up to code. I'm saying we're not bringing them to new build code because it's inherently impossible. You can't, I mean, you'd have to tear all the buildings down to do that. And that is not economically feasible for any person who does this at all. So then on top of that, we take the entire risk on our backs. So from the purchase to the holding time, to the contracting, to the liability as typically as a builder, it's for a year, from my understanding, a year post ownership or post sale. So then the liability after a year for anything that has, defections, then that adds up for us, not just on what we're doing, but we have to try to cut costs everywhere. So sometimes, let's say we make, we hit a home run on one property and we do very, very well with one, the other one, we've lost 20 grand. And that is inherently the business, but the business also does something that no other business does in this town, or no other person is willing to address is the degraded properties. The fact that we're addressing, that, I wouldn't call it shelters for homeless, but we're definitely shelters for bad things. And that is part of the risk. That's why we do this. Not because of we're trying to give somebody else a property that isn't up to building code. We're trying to go in and fix something that inherently brings the value of other properties around it down and change the neighborhood so where that neighborhood is now increased. The quality of that neighborhood is better. The people thank you. The homeowners around you thank you while you're working on it because they realize that what you're doing is inherently bringing the quality of the people in that neighborhood up. And I've had that happen multiple times where they thank me. I've had them actively participate in a building because they really want to see it change. And at the end of the day, when we have to try to bring a property that's built in 1970 up to 2012 existing, our 2012 new building code is impossible. Existing building code is not necessarily impossible. There's so many different interpretations of it that it becomes very challenging. And that's the problem. It's addressing, just like this to me, the vagueness of how it's written is inherently why I'm here. And the vagueness of some of the existing building code would also be the reason why I challenge some of the things that are in there. And so it goes back to the fear of having an unexpected expense hit us to where we lose money in the business and then we can't continue to do what we're doing.
Well, it sounds like you've got good intent. There's a value there, but it doesn't justify breaking the law.
The condition of the other 3 units, are they equal as that as you described the 2 you were working on?
You mean the buildings themselves or just
Well, you said it was a 5-plex, right?
Yes.
So you've got 2 of them?
Two.
So
No,
this-
just two 5-plex buildings, too.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So you have all of the 5-plex?
Correct, and then
Okay.
I have one separately owned, I have a building that's separately owned that I had a notice, an NOPR on, and that I had pulled a permit under my own personal name. And that was another instance where I was contesting the progressive fine because I was doing it not in the actions of Lund Construction, but as myself. And I was working on the home under the intent that I could work on the home under the code. It's my own home.
And a question of
Is your
staff.
personal residence?
It will intend to be my personal residence, yes. I couldn't live in it at the time that I purchased it.
Do you still have it?
I do, I'm
Are
still
you
working
living
on
in
it. Not yet, I can't live in it yet.
Are these townhouses?
The two-
Design?
The 2 5-plex that we're talking about, it's apartment style.
Okay. So we're talking, this is fully under the IBC? in
Yes.
terms of code.
Commercial, yeah.
Yep.
Just
I want to hear it through your words. Do you acknowledge that there was construction done without a building permit? That should be permitted, I guess.
I acknowledge that the day he was there, that he witnessed work being worked on at that moment in time that needed a permit by somebody who was licensed in that field, which is electrical, at that moment in time. Evidentiary speaking, what he saw the day he showed up is what I'm not disagreeing that permits were required for both buildings in that sense.
Okay. And you have in the past been cited for performing construction without a building permit.
Correct.
Any other questions for them at this particular time, our appellant?
One question.
Yes, sir.
The date of this letter you wrote, was handwritten to the muni at a previous NLPR, blah, blah, blah. There's no date other than the dates.
Page 6.
Page 6, MOA page 6. It's got dates for the signature of the admission and the union representatives, but when did you write this letter?
Well, I mean, it was before that, if I can go back and find the, that
So,
was for the
we
non-interest.
usually answer these within the same day or a day before.
Yeah, it was
So
probably.
when I saw my signature here on the bottom, 6/23/17,
Yeah,
it may have been when they came in at 6/22 or 6/23.
thank you. And you agree with that, Shelby?
I-
In that timeframe?
I do, because this was, I think this one was the one that attached to the West 46, my personal property.
Thank you.
Okay. Based on that, I'll turn it over to staff at this time for your position.
I guess through the chair, just a point of clarification that the municipality of Anchorage does adopt an existing building code, and the existing building code is quite liberal. And obviously, so much so that it's really subject to interpretation. And this may be for the appellant's benefit, but if an inspector requires you to do something that you do not believe you should have to do, you should take it to the chief of inspections. And if you're still not satisfied, then it comes to me, the building official. And we vet these interpretations, and we do our best to make sure that we're right and we're consistent. But anyway, that's a process that you probably haven't engaged in, because I haven't seen that happen from my perspective. I acknowledge that the language in 2310, 104, 1542, that last sentence on, I guess, page 3 of the October 12th letter, that I know I didn't write that myself. I know who wrote that, and I know what the intent of that was. It doesn't read very well. That's going to get clarified the next time we do a code upgrade to make sure that it's explicitly clear what's going on there. But the intent was basically to prevent this scenario where you have one individual who's basically going through multiple LLCs, and they may not be doing those LLCs to avoid progressive fines, but one could really try and manipulate and work the code to say that that they could get there. And obviously our argument is that no, that this is what we're trying to prohibit. Our goal is to have people get permits. And the only reason for a permit is to get an inspection done, to see that the work that's being done is to code and the safe, and then that the future homeowners are going to be protected, and the future homeowners know that when they buy a building, that it is up to a minimum standard, not necessarily current code. Code changes 3 years. There's probably not a building in Anchorage that meets current code, you know, if you really want to
Yeah.
get philosophical about the whole deal.
Yeah.
But, anyway. Clark or Hans, do you have anything you want to add?
My thing is too, is if these are being permitted, who's actually doing the work? Who's the electrical person? Who's the mechanical person? Who's the plumbing person? To me, it comes, you know, especially those things, comes down to safety. There's, you know, someone goes in and some guy from Craigslist goes in and wires an entire house and burns down the house or fiveplex, and we have a Royal Inn Suites problem. Who's liable for that? It's preventing that stuff from happening is my biggest thing. And making sure that the work done is safe.
In this section, I was just curious on MOA page 3. The underline, that's not part of the code, that was emphasis added for clarification in this letter?
No, that's part of the code.
It is underlined as such?
It's not underlined in the code.
No.
We just underlined it to make our point that progressive fines apply.
That's what I was
Right.
asking about. It's not underlined in the code.
No.
It was underlined for emphasis for the
Right.
purpose of this
Right.
letter.
Correct.
Is there other cases where this has happened within the municipality where you've had change of name for violation in order to avoid
I believe
permits
so.
or fines or something?
I
How is
believe
it?
so, that's the reason why this description has been put into the code. Because I believe we have not, I wasn't here then, but what I was told, that individuals had companies and didn't just switch companies to get around it. And that's why this paragraph was put in, just to prevent that from happening again. But that might have been 3-4 years ago.
Okay, there is the case, but you're not familiar
I'm
with
not familiar with it, no.
an exact.
No,
instance.
but
Yeah.
I've been told that's the reason why this specific wording was put in, for that reason.
So this, and it's still progressive, right? Whether it's the third time, fourth time, fifth time. The next time that this happens, if it's the fifth time, it's gonna be a $5,000
Right,
fine. Let's say
right.
it's a different house,
Right.
completely different project. If it is determined that they're doing work without a permit, it'll be a $5,000 fine applied to that project.
That's correct.
To that person.
Yes.
There's not an upper end limit that I
No,
found anywhere.
no.
So the purpose of what you're trying to avoid here then is obviously after a person has done it one time, and each time you catch them, you could assess them $1,000 fine. But that would be it
Right.
if it wasn't progressive.
Right, exactly, right.
Okay.
And there are companies that are up to 15,000.
Well,
Wow.
Yes.
Do they wear bullseyes on their back?
so how is that pursued? How is the collection of these fines pursued, or is it, I mean, is there other enforcement for collection?
Well, they're required to pay the fine in order to get the permit issued for them to complete the job, okay? If that's not significant impetus to pay the fine and they just walk away from it, eventually we would, send it through the municipal collection system, which kind of leases a collection agency on them.
Okay.
The other thing we can do is put a note on the deed.
Yep, we can record upon
We
the
record
property as a
something
dangerous
on the
building,
property.
depending on what has happened.
Right.
One question, if I might, of staff. So the investigation fee, is this involve field work and looking at the property as well as paper research of what's in your files?
That's correct. Yes.
And so that would be a point where you would identify potential range of deficiencies that would need correction.
Right. It's also, it's 1,000, or it can be a part of the permit fee, a percentage of the permit fee, whichever is greater.
Okay, thank you.
Seems to me I remember that if you were performing work without a building permit, you can be charged double fees, double permit. Is that,
That's changed. I think that used to be.
is that old language?
I think so.
Been
Yeah.
replaced by this?
Mhm.
Okay.
That's probably one or two versions of the admin code ago.
I'm trying to get pieces.
Yeah.
Anything else for staff at this time? I had something, I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe it'll come back to me. Get back to it at that time. You've got an opportunity to rebuttal their presentation. Do you have anything that you care to add to your case?
I appreciate your clarification on the existing building code. I think my biggest point was that I don't understand the finding of the contractors. That to me makes the very least amount of sense in this situation, and which is why I'm contesting it to try to receive the fine as the company LLC, the San Roberto Project LLC. Because if this is not looking at it from this specific instance, but any future instance where they go after a contractor for working on a project without having a permit, and the responsibility to pull a permit falls on the homeowner, and they find the contractor, even under the municipal code, it says the homeowner is the one responsible for applying and obtaining the permit in that section. And so
Or
what?
his agent.
Huh?
Or his agent.
Which
His
could be
agent
a
and the
contractor.
the authorized, but it has to be in writing. The definition of that's at the beginning of the Title 23. It has to be something on file in writing with the municipality as an authorized agent. And so if that's not there, then I would assume that the owner would be the one responsible. If the contractor brings something in saying they can pull the permit for this property, then the municipality now has something in writing and they pull the permit. In this instance, it doesn't address the failure to pull a permit and not having an authorized agent on file. So they've fined a contracting company, 3 different contracting companies, for the actions of what I'm trying to state is the actions of San Roberto Project LLC, and myself in that context, of myself as the owner of the company. I am also an owner of a separate LLC, and it happens to be a contracting company, but I wasn't acting in that sense on that property in regards to that property and doing and work being completed in that project as myself as the contracting company. I was acting in the sense that I was the owner of the property. And so the failure to pull the permit and the notice of the permit falls on the individual under here, under the violation, that they must issue that violation to the person in charge being me and the owner of San Roberto Project LLC through BSSP Holdings. And so I'm confused as to why they're issuing that violation to the contracting companies, because even under the municipal code, I am allowed as a commercial building owner to do alterations to a commercial building in which I own. And that is a section in there. So I don't need a contractor's license, and I don't have to act in the sense as a contractor under the municipal code to work on that property.
I believe that it doesn't, I believe that that's true for your own residence, but I don't believe that that's true if you own a commercial building, that you can do your work.
I haven't.
Owner can act as a general.
But it doesn't mean that you can do the other work, or have the other work, or have the other work hired and done without permits.
Well, and I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm stating that the issuance of this violation should be issued to San Roberto Project LLC, and it should be addressed in that sense, not in the sense that they're addressing it as the previous violations we've received from other projects that we've done under different names. Under different names, as myself or as Lund Construction, we've received violations. In this instance, we're receiving a violation as San Roberto Project LLC. I'm acting in regards because I'm allowed under the municipal code to act in that sense as a contractor and do the work on it under a commercial property under this code. And so I'm acting in that sense of, and by not pulling a permit, acting in the same sense. I'm not disagreeing that I didn't pull a permit. I did not pull a permit, and we did do a violation there. So I'm not disagreeing with the violation. I'm disagreeing that they're fining multiple people and hands in the pot when even under the municipal code, it states that the owner or authorized agent is the responsible party to pull and obtain the permit.
Can I ask a couple questions relative to that, Chair?
Yes.
So, I guess where I'm gonna head with my questions or line of questions here is, so based on what you've just said, let me ask you to put yourself in a scenario where you're a contractor, you don't have any LLCs, and as an owner, I've asked you to do this work on my project, and it requires a permit. I have failed to obtain a permit. Would you ask me if the permit's in hand, or would you just start work and say, it's not my problem?
And this is for work regarding in necessity of a permit. Something, let's say, for example, I'm allowed to do structural.
It would require a
Yeah,
permit.
I'm allowed to do structural work in the sense that requires stuff that typically requires a permit.
I've got a piece of property that's got nothing on it, and I've got a home that's been estimated at $750,000 of work. And that covers structural, it covers site, landscaping, civil, the whole 9 yards. So I don't have a permit for that. I got a set of drawings, I've asked you to start building. Would you start building, or would you ask me, do you have a permit for this?
I have addressed this in my invoice as well, and I say, you need permits. Are you gonna get permits? And if the answer is no, then I tell them, typically I address the issue of, well, the fine may come down on your head. If you do, you're gonna be responsible for that. And if you'd still like me to do the work, it depends on what it is. That sounds like a very large project. I would not do that. But on a smaller level,
Okay.
I gotta do work, right?
Well, let me ask this question of staff on this. Is there state law that requires you to have a permit to do construction? I mean, is there a link between the permit and a contractor doing work with or without? I mean, it would seem to me that there is some obligation in that you require licensed contractors for certain levels of work. The state does as well, right?
Yeah, so the first part, yeah, there's no state law necessarily requires the permit. It's the municipal law that requires the permit.
Okay.
State law requires licensed contractors administer work unless it's an owner builder.
Okay.
I thought state law did require a permit through the state fire marshal.
Well, they do.
Fireplex.
Yeah, for certain types of work they do, but I wouldn't even call it a permit. They require a plan review through the state fire marshal's office because they don't do inspections necessarily.
Right.
So
Okay, but there's a formal process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not connected to any municipal process.
Okay.
I don't dispute that it gets a little confusing in municipal law. Municipal law is actually a lot more clear about who can act as a contractor and who can perform work than state law is.
So, now this is I'm just gonna be real blunt with my question, and
That's
don't
fine.
take it as being confrontational or anything, but, is the intent of your appeal to be able to have a piece of paperwork in the end that allows you to share in the costs with the owners versus you as an entity yourself bearing that burden? I guess what's boiling down to, in my mind, whether it's the owner sitting there or the contractor, this has been found to be work without a permit, and it's appropriate to have a fine. Or let me say, it's appropriate to stop work, then go through the process of the administrative code in terms of what then repercussions there may be. So my question is, you seem to continually be coming back saying, it's not me, Shelby, or my contracting company, Lund Construction, it's San Roberto, this LLC, that is the responsible party. So I sense that you're saying that San Roberto then is subject to that fine, or subject to any penalties associated with work without permit. Is that what you're trying to get?
I'm saying that solely San Roberto Project LLC is the one that is allowed to be fined. I don't think under the code, if they're issuing a violation to the contracting companies, they have the ability under the code, based on the interpretation that the requirement for a permit is the owner or authorized agent, that they have the ability to fine the contractor for not filling a permit.
So with that said, are you trying to pursue an avenue where you are not burdened with the full cost and that the LLC is sharing in the cost?
I am pursuing an avenue to where the LLC is receiving the fine and not the contracting companies.
So you're not disputing that a fine is appropriate?
I am not disputing a fine is appropriate.
Is this a simple solution of?
Well,
Rewriting.
let me add a couple of things here. So the first two fines, the one at Valleywood and the one at 46, have that fine been paid? Has that fine been paid?
Yeah, I paid Valleywood was a waiver, which was the first.
Right.
And then the 46th was also paid. That's the one I'm currently.
Okay, so in that one, you were fined $1,000 for 46, and then you were also assessed $1,000 for Valleywood Drive
On 46th?
on 46.
Well,
Is that correct? Is that how?
So both of them are on 46.
No.
So the $2,000 only applies to 46. It's the second offense, $2,000.
Okay,
Right.
got it.
First
Got it.
And-
So that's done, that's a done deal.
and in that sense, I argued the same thing, because under that situation of 46th, I had pulled it. I was originally stating and acting in the sense that I was the owner of the project, but regardless, both of those, which were owned by me personally, if I'm contesting it the way that I'm contesting it, then regardless of how I contest it, I would still receive the violations in the same sense. So how they issued the violations and how I would have contested it, that the first one was contested on Lund Construction, stating that Lund Construction received the fine at Valleywood, and I got a waiver. Technically, it was on both properties in which I owned in my name. And for failure to procuring a permit, then I should receive the permit, the violations that were appropriately issued in that sense. So the $1,000 waived and then the $2,000 in the second one was absolutely correct, because both of those are they're in my personal name. And to continue what I'm trying to argue would be correct. So the next one that I own in my personal name, in which I were to start without work that requires a permit, without a permit, I would be issued a $3,000 fine as the owner, because it would be my third one as my owner. In the sense that what I'm contesting is that if their interpretation were to look at it, they would be fining us in the sense that it would be the fifth one, because of Lund Construction, doing it as Lund Construction, because they're tying me to Lund Construction, me personally.
In which Lund Construction was not on site for either of those.
And that is
Just
true.
because his name is tied to another LLC.
But you're part owner of Lund Construction.
I'm part owner.
So, but was anybody that was employed with Lund Construction working on Valleywood or 46th Avenue?
We just have 1099s.
You did all that work yourself?
No. I have 1099s. I hire independent contractors who specifically
Okay.
are supposed to have their licenses, in which some of them had not gotten.
So, John, I guess to kind of head where you were headed, if we say, okay, San Roberto LLC is responsible for third and fourth offense, it's actually first and second offense. So now instead of $3,000 and $4,000, it's $0 and $2,000.
I believe the waiver is
The waiver.
is optional.
The waiver is optional,
The
it may
waiver-
be
the
waived.
waiver is optional.
It may be
Okay,
waived.
okay, so it would be.
0 and 2 or 1 and 2.
It would be 1 and 2 instead of 3 and 4. So then the next time this happens, he's under a different LLC and it starts at 1 again.
Over again.
And then the next time,
So the
then
most
the one
you're,
after that. So then we have this cycle where he changes LLCs for every project that he does now.
they
Exactly.
got
Then he's
$1,000
over
exposure.
1,000 fine instead of going to 5, 6, 7.
Right, right.
So that's the other scenario.
That- and
Not
that's-
to be negative, but
No, but that's
the reality of it.
That in theory is exactly what I'm contesting, not necessarily saying that for the future we are going to not pull permits. I'm contesting it under the way the code is written currently and how I'm interpreting. I believe that what I'm doing is allowed and I'm asking to be fined in this sense 1,000, 2,000 based on the way that I'm reading it. Not in any other sense of the, you know, not going back to the statement at the beginning of the code, which talks about true intent of the code.
So what did you just mention here a little bit about what projects was one construction on and what projects were they not on?
46th, which, 46th Street and Valleywood, where Shelby bought his own properties and was working on his own properties, and I went off and bought my own properties and was working on my own properties. I was busy with my properties when Clark and Shelby met on his properties, so I think there was just a tie there of, oh, Shelby, you know Slavic, and then let's just find Lund Construction when I intend on staying in this town and building, and it's my effort to keep my slate clean and you know, go through the learning curve and the learning process. Our business model is not to pull permits. It's been a steep learning curve of what's allowed, what's not allowed, and then the different answers we get from different people.
Okay, so you were not on what is referred to here as first offense and second offense.
Correct.
Lund
Yes.
Construction. Now, Lund Construction is owned by,
Both of us.
4 people.
No, it's owned by both of us. I have that one if they don't have that one in there.
well,
Well, that's the
SL Holdings. And BSSD Holdings are members of SL Holdings, which owns Lund Construction.
But again, it's about the separation of liability there. There are two separate entities. And as an entity, well, if I'm doing something as one entity, then I'm not doing it necessarily in the sense of another entity. And if I did, it would be, again, kind of a conflict of interest at some point. But again, it's like saying I have an airplane company, and the actions of me as an airplane company is, yeah, I'm getting fined as an airplane company, even though I'm doing the actions in the sense of San Roberto Project LLC. That's my, I actually do have an airplane company, and I rent an airplane out of it. And that would, to me, ties the same logic, that just because I was a contractor and a general contractor, so I can go do work on other people's properties as a general contractor, doesn't necessarily mean that the actions that are taken in the property that in which I own in a separate entity are underneath that, because I'm allowed to under the municipal code.
Send another question back to Stella.
You don't see why not. If we have questions, this is our opportunity. We own this thing.
Okay. If I might ask a question of staff, relative to the language of 104.15.4.2, Ross, you noted that the next cycle, this would be looked at in terms of the revision language-wise. My question is, did you or has anyone obtained a recent input from the legal department relative to the issue of, we've got no individual or company granted a waiver under this section shall be afforded additional waivers for future offenses. Now, I'm not an attorney, but I would assume an LLC is a company, and I would assume that a individual building or contractor is an individual, and they could also be a company. Has there been any input that has said that there's not a legal trail to previous individual company, and just because it's a new LLC, if in fact there's that part ownership, that it still is tracking that individual?
Yeah, through the chair, no. Yeah, this really hasn't been vetted legally that I'm aware of. You know, legal reviews our code, but whether they really like sat down. I mean, we did get an opinion from an informal opinion from Sam Severin, who works for the
Okay.
municipal attorney's office, that he believed in this instance that progressive fines applied, but I wouldn't say that that was like a real thorough vetting of it, you know, in my opinion.
So let me ask now another question. So let's say we don't act, the three, which I don't think we're not going to in some form, but let's say we don't act. We see a procedure of Mr. Stanley pursuing a broader hearing with the group, and somehow the opinion doesn't go Mr. Stanley's way. There's the obvious avenue then of taking it to Superior Court?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just wondering, again, we're kind of in a position here, I feel, making ultimately a legal decision here that, you know, the way I read it, I track it that individual, company, use mirrors, whatever you want to do, it's still saying an individual or the company bears that burden. And so I'm having a hard time weighing Mr. Stanley's appeal just because I don't know legally what the outcome is, and I'm afraid I'm gonna act on just my gut feeling and my interpretation of an individual or a company. And I'm willing to live by that, but I guess I'm more or less speaking out of turn here in terms of deliberation, but you want to call
Yeah, or through the chair, if I may speak in regards to that. You know, per, you know, Title 23, through the creation of the board, the powers and the duties of the board, none of you guys are expected to be experts in contract law. You know, really, your only job, your only burden is to rule in accordance with what you see in 2310.
Okay. Thank you.
What is the criteria slash, I don't know what the next word is, that is required for behind obtaining a contracting license within the municipality? What is its purpose, and what has to be done in order to obtain a contractor's license?
So it varies depending on what type of contractor you are.
Generally.
But for a general contractor, they basically just have to have a state contractor's license. So they have to meet whatever criteria the state's require, and then plus they have to post a bond.
And what is the state's licensure criteria?
For a general contractor, I don't believe it requires any sort of exam or demonstration of any sort of special skills that I'm aware of,
The residential endorsement's a little more involved. You get residential endorsement.
but just the general contractor.
Could I add something? Yes, that is true. I actually, the property that I received my second violation on, I purchased it in my name, and I wanted to pull the permit in my name. In that sense, I wanted to do the work and reside in the property, or the intent to reside in the property. There's no verbiage on intent to reside or a designated time span to which you should reside in the property, which for future reference could be added for you guys to clarify that, because that's something that I found as a loophole to get in there. so that I don't have to have a residential endorsement to be able to work on that property. And that, because that individual project was actually a project that would have required me under a contractor, general contractor, to have a residential endorsement. But because I'm a property owner and I'm doing the work as the property owner, there is no necessity to have a residential endorsement, from my understanding.
The general contracting consists of an application, a pulse, and a fee. And you are now licensed with the state and another fee, and you are now licensed with the muni. And I was very surprised, but that's the whole deal. The residential endorsement comes with an exam if you're working on the bigger projects. And that falls into a price percentage of the property worth. To answer your question, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Anything else? Based on that, we'll close the public hearing and go into deliberation and discussions.
Mr. Chairman,
First one here.
I move to grant approval of appeal BCI 042017.
Grant approval of appeal.
And if I might just give a little bit of background.
Yeah.
I've always been trained to make a motion in the positive.
Right. Okay. I second.
You?
So if I may speak to my motion, this is a tough one. I will state I don't intend on supporting the appeal. And my reasoning or background is, as I read the language in 2310-105, 15.4.2, I think the identification of an individual or a company relative to the fees in 3M is clear enough in my mind that the intent is to not have a repeat of work without permits occurring within the municipality. And the fact that the structure of the LLC has individuals, and it is a company, but those individuals also have a past history as individuals relative to previous work violations, that it's appropriate for that individual to bear the burden of those fines that have been stated. I think the issue of trying to say that the LLC is new to the business and the game and therefore go ahead and fine them is just an unfortunate way of not addressing the real issue which is to own up and obtain permits for projects as work gets done. And so in that, based on that, I can't support not supporting the municipality's actions and position on this matter. And so I won't be voting in favor of the appeal.
Okay.
Comments, Mr. Field?
Yeah, I pretty much feel the same way. I think the wording, no individual or company granted a waiver under this section shall be afforded additional waivers for future offenses applies in this particular case, primarily because this individual is owner in two different LLCs and in the companies involved with working with those LLCs, and whether originally they knowingly or didn't knowingly set up those LLCs to avoid progressive fines, I'm not gonna deal with that, but based on what I've heard, there's an apparent callousness towards permitting process, towards getting permits, because there's a potential financial issue with that and the flipping of your houses. So I see this as a continuous cycle with, at this point, potentially different LLCs for every home, so that this fine can't continue to be progressive. But I think that it definitely applies. So I also will be not voting in favor of the appeal. But I would suggest that if you want to take it to the full board, where all 14 members can hear your case.
Anything additional to add? Ready for vote? Ken?
Mr. Steele?
I'll be voting no.
Okay. Mr. Field?
No.
And Mr. Boone?
No.
3 nays.
As Mr. Field mentioned, well, formally, the motion fails for the appeal. As Mr. Field mentioned, you do have the opportunity to appeal to the full building board. It is your prerogative to do so.
Well, I guess what I would say about that is that you'll have a number of members of the board that are, that are in the construction industry. That's what I do as well. I'm design build coordinator for Easter Construction. These guys are architects, unfortunately. But there's a number of home builders and other people on the board that may see it differently than how we've seen it. So, this is part of our job of being on the board. This 3-member panel is fairly new compared to the full board hearing now. What would be a de novo hearing? And I think if you feel strongly enough about this, I would suggest that you take it to the full board.
I mean, I do, I don't, there's a point where, I spend another $500 and my thought is I pay the $500 to take the risk on it and continue where now work progression doesn't continue on that project. And for me, the cost of not continuing work on that project now is greater than the cost to try to remedy the issue and the fines that we have in this instance. And while I wanted to challenge this, and I think that the decision, obviously, I'm going to feel the same way, and you guys are probably feel the opposite. There is a point where if we continue to go and it takes another month from now, it won't be feasible for these 2 projects now. And that's a problem for us, is that when we can't do anything in those projects and we get the properties locked up in the context of the municipal code, then I can't challenge something like this and then it ends. I can't continue to do it. And for us, between having 4 people involved in this project, and if we don't get them sold by like February, then we do actually begin to start losing money on one. And so that's a problem for us. I can't pursue something like this that I actually believe, it doesn't state, the intent is there, but that's not what it states. And that's what, to me, I'm bothered by, is what it states is not what its intent. And I think rewriting it is appropriate. I'm not disagreeing with that. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I would request having more educational standards for contractors' licenses, actually, and if I could, because I think realistically we do need more of that. But I think with increased educational standards, we should have a reduced maybe a benefit to that in terms of permitting and licensing and inspections. I understand you can do that. The 1 and 2 family dwelling unit plan review option is fantastic, and that has made headway in town from what I've heard, especially from a couple of guys that I know who do full builds. That's fantastic for them. I think having something along those lines for people who want to go out and get and pursue more education in the industry, and then be able to get leniency on, to some extent, on, not necessarily permitting, but more ease of ability to do a project fluidly. Because I think that one of the big things, and I've heard it from AHBA, I've heard it from a lot of people, that they complain that regulation is one of the biggest downfalls to building in this town. And I understand that, because I'm seeing it on just a small scale with flips. And I can only imagine what it would be on doing a full build in terms of the economic cost of it too. I've never done it, basically, but, so
They
I.
don't show that on those reality shows, all this stuff, do they?
No, they don't.
It's pretty easy.
And it wasn't the reason I got into this. No, I like this. I actually enjoy, I was nervous and stressed about this process, but to me, the reality is I appreciate it. I think it's a nice alternative to having to go the route of attorneys or, anything there. I don't want to go that route. It's not beneficial for me. Because I think that what they're doing is inherently necessary too. Because I've seen the work of individuals that aren't qualified to do some of the work in town. And I've had them as independent contractors of my business, and I wasn't satisfied with it. And so I had to go back and repair that. And having to go back and fix that from people who are, they represent themselves as qualified, and really they're not. That shows to me that there's really not enough standards and way to show that somebody's capable of doing the work. So I would actually advocate for greater educational standards, both in the state and the municipality, especially to uphold the permitting requirements, because I think it would make it a little, and if we're gonna go after the contractors in that sense, then we should make it not easier, but just a fluid conversation. And I brought that up to you, just an easy, fluid process. I've had a lot of it, I challenge something and I get 5 different answers sometimes. So for me, having that I just wish there was more uniformity in the office of having the correct answer. And then that's, you kind of have to hop around to get an answer. I've had that before. Hey, I need a permit. Do I need a plumber to pull a toilet? One says yes, one says no. Well, I mean,
There's only one answer that matters.
it's the one that you want to hear.
Now, Rod, if he pays the fine, he can still challenge, can he? Does that preclude him from challenging?
No, you're right, he could still appeal it and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, so you could appeal this decision, pay me, I have to write a
Hey,
petition.
pay me.
Actually,
Basically, I have to write the decision. You have within 5 business days to respond. So if you say, yes, I want to go through with the de novo, you come in, we fill out the form, we pay the $500 fee, and then if I can get everybody, I can have at the next board meeting, which would be November 2nd. Now, if you show up, in the code, it does say you get your $500 back.
just
If
I show up.
you show up and you win.
you sure?
Yes.
That's
if-
how you had to win. to get
Yeah,
$500.
and you- have to win.
and the number's a bit
Because
greater.
Thompson
But
tried
that
that.
wasn't exactly my question. My question was, if
Then
he pays the
the
fine
fine.
in order to free his project so he can continue construction, as I understand it anyway, he can still appeal
Yeah, Colony Builders
and
did that.
then get his money back if he wins.
Yeah.
That would be the question I have, and I didn't address that before. We would have started work last week. But, I mean,
Do you have a permit now?
no, the point is we would have paid for it.
Don't say you start
We
working
would
on
have paid fine.
No, I don't remember the question being asked, and I never thought of it.
No, I guess I didn't ever ask it when I had the meeting with you guys, could we pay the fine?
Yes, you could pay the fine and still appeal it.
If we won the appeal to the full board, let's say we won the appeal, would we be reimbursed the amount difference that I'm requesting, which in this instance would be $11,000, essentially? Because I'm paying it for, we're paying it for the 3
It'd be a
months.
refund.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that was the reason I had this debate between the four
Yeah.
partners, was that my understanding would be, it's going to the municipal coffers and we're done, and if I go through now, it's just arguing on principle. And, I mean, which is okay, but it's also trying to increase our bottom line. I mean, the idea here is also to do that, and if I can do that, even understandably knowing that we did this, and I agree with all of your decisions in the sense that you have your respective decisions. Perspective is everything, and you gotta look at it from a different angle. We'll all do things for the reasons we do them, I appreciate your decision. Will probably not continue.
I don't think we're gonna push this any further, although, kind of end it here and get a better understanding of
The inner workings of the municipality's Department of Building Development Services.
Well, it's your prerogative, but I do want you to understand the process that you have ahead of you, so.
Thank you. I
and the
appreciate
options,
that.
so.
And at that hearing, we can't participate. So you,
Until they decide to.
Until they
open it up
decide if they
for-
can hear it. If they
Right.
want to hear it,
Right.
Which
then you can come back.
In the sense to open up this as a future, to maybe bring this as an awareness and to have requests for changes in the future, because I don't know what it takes to change Title 23. Would this be something worth doing in terms of opening up awareness to ask for changes in Title 23? Because I don't know if you guys as the board are responsible for that.
we've got a lot of ideas on making it better, more clear.
As you can hear,
So if those are ever entertained, we're willing to.
I'd be willing to invest
Yes.
it just to try to entertain those ideas, because to me, I think it would be, ironically, I want more regulation out of this, and that's very contrary to my thought process. And
And your business model.
I think more regulation with less oversight is what I would say. So more educational regulations with less oversight would be where you have to pay for an education, you have to pay into somebody that's approved by the municipality for the, like the, what was it, the residential endorsement. Something like that, but even more educational, because I spent 2 days in that and I learned some stuff, but it wasn't it wasn't rocket science, and it wasn't a full understanding of how to build a house. It was just, energy saving tips. And I get that, but maybe having a full educational requirement would help. I've seen certifications, and example would be Texas. There's certifications for mold remediation. You have to have a 4-year degree. And I don't disagree with that, but like getting a real estate license, you don't need a 4-year degree. And yeah, some of the people that handle some of the most, the biggest investment for most people's lives is somebody that is only high school educated. I mean, not saying that they're not intelligent, I'm just saying the standard for which you enter that is not great. Where some of you guys have, doctorates, essentially doctorates in building. And that to me is what I think about, when some of the inspectors shows up and they can literally on-site reference a code section from their head is amazing to me, because I know how thorough that is, and it's unbelievable. But thank you guys. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedules for this.
You're quite welcome. Thank you for going through the process.
Any additional comments to be made? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Stand adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.